Ai Weiwei is China's most politically outspoken artist.
你这叫什么逻辑？作为公安来说，这个人没罪，关了他再去了解他情况。
If you question about the communist authority, or if you're questioning basic human rights, then you're not free.
His work is admired and acclaimed throughout the world. And he designed this in his spare time. The Bird's Nest Olympic Stadium in Beijing. His new work, especially created for Tate Modern, was 2.5 years in the making. It took 1,600 people to produce 100 million handcrafted sunflower seeds, fashioned from the finest Chinese porcelain and spread across the floor of the Turbine Hall. In tonight's Imagine, we meet a man pioneering in his art and fearless in his politics.
Ai Weiwei is, to my mind, the most significant Chinese artist that certainly we are aware of in the West. He's articulate, he's passionate, he goes to the edge, he's unafraid of criticizing the politics and the situation in his own country, nor indeed is he afraid of criticizing Western capitalism in some way either. He is a unique figure.
He's not only an artist, he's not only a scholar, he's a photographer. He designs clothes. He's a specialist in precious stones. He's an antique furniture dealer. He is an architect. He's a landscape architect. I mean, the list is endless.
There's a reason why there's not very many people like Ai Weiwei in China, and the reason is that it's very risky.
At his studio in Beijing, Ai Weiwei spends much of his day on Twitter, a website banned in China. Before it was shut down by the Chinese authorities, his previous blog was followed by hundreds of thousands. In a country where his views are rarely published, it gives him a vital cultural space to exchange ideas, and it's raised his profile with a growing fan base.
要不要也来一张？
要，他都受我影响才喜欢。我还上那照出来照2张。
再见啊！
再见。
再见啊！
再见。其实您挺普通的，没有我想象那么高的。再见，拜拜。
So this set is Marble Works on the. It's the kind of camera they put on in front of my door by undercover police. So they're really monitoring my activity, tap my telephone. Whatever we say, they know it. And they check on my banking activities and sometimes follows me. I think it's kind of intimidating me. They see this kind of camera everywhere now. So I think this is a really very important object of our time. I see many people, other people who had much less activities are being put away and sentenced. And also some people who relate to me also being put in jail. So if you think about it, you all lost your sleep. It's kind of terrifying.
Since I was denied permission from the Chinese government to interview Ai Weiwei in Beijing, I had no alternative but to use his favoured medium, the internet, until we could eventually meet in London.
It's very nice to meet you.
you know, I wanted to come, but I couldn't come. There was...
Yes.
You're used to communicating in this way, I take it.
I start to in love with this kind of meetings.
Because this is the way to express yourself freely in a way that you couldn't otherwise, or you're not personally able to do.
Yes, in many cases, this is the only way, only channel. And it can really express yourself clearly and very direct.
Is that expression, that ability to express yourself, an important part of who you are and what you have been all your life as an artist?
Yes, I realize this is a core value for artists, to fight for your rights and to clearly express who you are, and to again and again to emphasize on that.
Ai Weiwei has always been outspoken, but a recent project put him in direct confrontation with the government. An earthquake in the Sichuan province in 2008 caused many school buildings to collapse, resulting in the death of thousands of children. In response, Ai Weiwei made a work from 9,000 children's rucksacks, covering the entire facade of the Museum of Art in Munich. It spelt out the heartfelt words of one grieving mother whose child was killed in the earthquake. She lived happily in this world for 7 years.
In that earthquake, about 100,000 people disappeared. So we realized the government trying not to telling people who is disappeared and for what reason.
Hundreds of schools collapsed while the surrounding buildings remained standing, which convinced many people that the schools hadn't been properly constructed.
In the ruins, there were only school bags left, and sometimes even names were withdrawn from these school bags, from these children's school bags. And of course, the young victims got buried immediately without the parents having the chance anyway to identify. So Ai Weiwei took up action, and very simple. He wanted to have names.
This chart we put on the wall is the names of those students who died in this earthquake. Those information has been considered as a state secret and never given out.
He asked followers of his blog to choose one name each and read it out.
张子豪、
李永超、
李习月、
向锦瑜、
曾海涛、
欧阳青青、
李龙俊、
朱吉。
So gradually it generates too much heat, and the government cannot bear with it, so they shut off my blog.
One campaigner, Tam Zuren, was arrested, charged with revealing state secrets. During the trial, Ai Weiwei traveled to Chengdu to testify in his defense, and as ever, documented his experiences.
我和公民调查在过去的8个月当中做了大量的工作，掌握着大量的事实。我相信我们的作证会证实他做人是无辜的。谁啊？警察。什么警察？对，他们已经破门而入了。干嘛？你不干嘛？你干嘛？不干嘛？我不干嘛？你打人是吧？出来，叫我开门，我不让你回啊！我打人，他打了我，知道吗？谁打的？这一次，谁看见了？做警察证明谁打的？谁打的你？
About 3,000 police just rushed into this hotel and kicked down the door very violently. And we had an argument, I asked them to show me their badge and for what reason they come to the hotel. They beat me. They locked us in the hotel until the court finished.
After the encounter, Ai Weiwei was suffering from severe headaches, but travelled to Germany for the opening of a major new exhibition of his work.
The very moment he arrived in Munich, he had such a headache that we decided to have him checked out, and he stayed in the hospital after for about 2.5 weeks.
The doctor said you have to stay and do the operation right away because this is very dangerous. You have blood in your,
your brain.
Yeah, and later the doctor told me if he didn't do it immediately, I may just die.
Today at his studio, Ai Weiwei examines some newly finished works. His interest in the cultural traditions of China has led him to explore the use of ceramic in his artwork. But for Ai Weiwei, creation and destruction go hand in hand.
It's not good. I mean, still feel very painful, but still come to a point you just have to do it, It's more like a self-punishing to really perform with some kind of standard. Yeah, it is. The whole process is very frustrating. Okay.
Born in 1957, Ai Weiwei grew up during a turbulent period in China's political history. The Cultural Revolution that began in the mid-60s was the name given to Mao Zedong's attempt to impose his vision of a classless society and to eliminate all those he suspected of undermining his authority. He singled out enemies such as landlords, counter-revolutionaries, rightists, foreign agents, capitalists, and intellectuals. Millions were forced into manual labor and tens of thousands executed.
Anything has traces about the past or has sentiment about the past has to be destroyed. Chairman Mao had a slogan about we can destroy old world and we can also build a new world. But build a new world has to be based on destroy the old world. So it's almost like a black and white situation.
Ai Weiwei was born the same year that his father became the target for this intense political campaign. And so his entire life was defined by his father's persecution.
Ai Weiwei's father, Ai Qing, was a distinguished revolutionary poet and a member of the Communist Party. He advised Mao on literary policy and wrote a poem that praised him. But his devotion to the party was called into question in 1956 when he wrote The Gardener's Dream, a short work of allegorical prose that told the story of a rose gardener who realized he was discriminating against other flowers. Despite its subtle theme, the work was seen as counter-revolutionary. Ai Qing was stripped of his titles and sent into exile with his family to a remote region of China at the edge of the Gobi Desert.
If you were branded a rightist, your family became what was called a black family. So within society, you were known to be a family that people weren't supposed to talk to. You were ostracized.
For the next 20 years, he couldn't write anything. It's not allowed to use his name to write. He was punished to doing the hard labor. To clean the public toilet, 13 of them, and which considered the most insulting and unbearable work. We lived underground, real underground. We dig a hole on the ground and we live in there. Of course, we have to make bricks ourselves, to dig the earth, to make the mold and make our bricks and fire it and take it out. So I know all the process, and I build my own bookshelves and my own bed. So you start to learn everything from very early age.
Ai Weiwei, I think, found refuge in some sense with his hands. I mean, he became almost obsessively interested in crafting things. He would make all kinds of homemade inventions.
Of course, when we grew up, it's not a fashion to talk about art or literature. And he burned all his books, because the right guard would come anytime to check on those books. So you better burn it, otherwise constantly the trouble you're in.
The government controlled everything, and the art was part of that. Many of the artists were put in what they called cowsheds, which was a kind of prison, and they were given animal names. They were called snakes and mules. Students used to take off their belts and whip them. And they stood in an airplane position, which is like this, for hours on end. So artists could only function as propaganda painters. Only approved subjects and approved styles. For 30 years, really, that was the art scene.
It's interesting, this motif, which was so popular, which is this motif of the sunflower. First of all, the idea of sunflowers that always turn to the sun became a ready metaphor for all of the people turning to look at Mao. So you have that kind of idea of obedience, inevitable obedience, because the sunflower doesn't choose.
In 1976, Mao Zedong died. He'd led the country for over 30 years and become one of the most influential and controversial figures in political history. Despite the cult of personality that had been fostered around him, after his death, many of his policies were abandoned as China embraced economic reform. The same year, I Ching was allowed to return to Beijing. It was a turning point for Ai Weiwei too.
By this time, your father's reputation had been rehabilitated. So what did your father say when you said you wanted to go to the United States?
He has been in many, many nations. He studied in Paris. But in his generation, when they decide to go out, the purpose is to use their knowledge to change China. So I told him that's his generation, and I don't care. I just have to leave. So I was quite extreme. I made a decision would never come back to China again. So I told my mother on the way to airport, I said, I'm going home.
Home for Ai Weiwei was New York.
First thing I want to experience is liberty. This is a really extremely liberal world. I very much want to record it. I have nothing else to do. I just, it's very simple. Have a camera and take a shot. Thompson Square Park probably was the most liberal park in New York City. It's surrounded by musicians, poets, artists, poor people, homeless.
A riot took place here in 1988 after the city authorities imposed a curfew on the park. Ai Weiwei found himself in the middle of it.
Just give us the park! Give us the park and we'll talk! Give us the park now!
To see a civil movement against local government or police brutality is very fascinating.
He lived on the Lower East Side, which at that time was really a down-and-out place. I went up in the elevator to his apartment, and it was just one room, a mattress on the floor, and the only other possession was a TV. And it was during the Senate investigation, I think it was the Iran-Contra hearings. He was so excited that the government would actually go after their own.
And you've admitted that you lied to the Congress, is that correct?
I have.
And you've admitted that you lied in creating false...
I start to realize there's many things I don't really understand. I should leave some image about it, so later on, maybe it can serve some purpose.
There was a very active Chinese exile community in New York, which he also documented. He had a lot of connections and dialogues with a Chinese diaspora, Chinese artists, composers, architects. And went, for example, to meet Allen Ginsberg. He met the poets of the Beat generation. And for him, the poetry link was vital.
Increasingly exposed to Western influences, Ai Weiwei visited museums and galleries, acquainting himself with a more conceptual approach to contemporary art, taking particular inspiration from Andy Warhol and Marcel Duchamp.
Don't make too much art, use what's already out there, but you as an artist, you can say this is art. Marcel Duchamp, very simple. And Marcel Duchamp also tries to question the context of art and when something gets to be art. When is art? Not what is art, but when is art.
I guess the important thing were these great influences that he discovered and had. Some things were direct homages, you know, a coat hanger bent into the shape of the profile of Duchamp. A double-ended shoe, as if the left and the right shoe had somehow morphed into one. It's the artwork as a kind of small, mysterious, enigmatic object. But in a way, the fact that everything was grounded in the everyday, in stuff that you could find on the street or in your wardrobe, gave him a great deal of freedom.
He's always liking to taking things apart, putting them back, but always with meticulous refinement, so they were beautiful objects. So Weiwei, when he does something, he does it really, really well.
If I look at those photos, I can see a young man who is struggling and trying to adjust himself to a new environment. It's a lot of struggle and also a lot of uncertainty there.
By 1989, uncertainty was also brewing in China. In April, following the death of a pro-democracy official, groups gathered in Tiananmen Square calling for political reform.
It's like a people's revolution, and it seems everything's going to change, and everybody is so enthusiastic about it.
Going to march.
They had such optimism. All these young people, they wanted to be represented. They wanted a voice.
My father was on a wheelchair. He personally went to the square to support the students. He said, whoever lost the way of the people would have lost their governing. And he showed strong support for the student.
Then, in early June, the army moved into the streets of Beijing with troops and tanks clearing the protesters with live fire. The exact number of deaths is not known, but is thought to be in the thousands.
Nobody believed this government can use tank. The impossible.
You went back to China because to see your father. Mm-hmm. Did that draw you back to China and keep you there?
At the very beginning, when I heard my father is ill, after the Tiananmen, and I started to realize some sort of a responsibility.
I think there was a certain point for him, particularly around Tiananmen Square, where you had this sort of deep freeze in the Chinese art world and in Chinese commercial life. And then afterwards you had this reawakening. And I think at that point he started to realize that something was happening in China. He had to participate in it.
Ai Weiwei soon began work on a series of underground books.
We call it black book, white book, and a gray book. The book has no title because this underground printing, that means it's not legal.
那么，所以开始从93年就酝酿要做一本这种书，所以90年代初的整个的这个文化艺术界是一个特别沉寂的这么一个状态。国外的这种前卫艺术大师的一些作品和他们的一些，这个书是等于是，如果说的就是不太好听的话，叫非法出版物。完了呢，找深圳的一家香港公司。 做的这个排版和印刷。
Yes, this is my photography. That's about in front of Tiananmen Square. It was very dangerous, actually, with kind of nudity. People are not ready to accept.
但是当时他们名不见经传，就是，但是都是就是那种创作的欲望。
It became a sensation, not only for foreigners who were interested in the Chinese art world, but really for Chinese artists themselves. I think it was one of the first times in that period where they started to realize that something was germinating. They became, in some sense, kind of iconic documents of that period, and they still are today.
I planted it because in the early time, we see my father really likes this kind of objects. He would touch it till it become very red. Yes, that's very, very unique.
Ai Weiwei's father died in 1996. By that time, he'd resumed his role as a distinguished literary figure and one of China's greatest modern poets, embraced by the establishment. His last words to his son were a plea for him to make his home in China.
I absolutely have no feeling about China. That's why my father said to me, you should take it as your home. You should be so polite and courteous. It's your home, and do whatever you like.
Having decided to stay, Ai Weiwei set up a studio in Beijing. Fascinated by China's pre-revolutionary history, its cultural traditions and craft skills, he found ways to incorporate these into his work.
I went to antique market because I want really to touch those objects. So it takes me about 6 years to really study every aspect. How history has moved through the shapes and technology and craftsmanships.
He likes to take iconic objects, objects that in some ways are deeply valued by Chinese people, either for kind of cultural reasons or for just simple practical reasons. And then he'll obviously treat it with a kind of flamboyant disregard for its value.
This series of works come from late 90s. I started to do reconstruct of the classic furniture, so-called Ming-style furnitures. But the most unique quality is it's all constructed without nails.
He would cut the four-legged table in half, and he would put 2 legs on the wall and 2 legs on the ground, and he'd had craftsmen put the table back together again as though it were made in the Ming Dynasty. So it was beautiful. Is this decorative art? Is this conceptual art? Is this kitsch? What is this?
In the period of Cultural Revolution, we would destroy everything. If you really destroy something, you have to really know and understand that. So make the whole act become very graceful. And so the original and the new thing can coexist in the new body. So that creates some kind of tension and power.
When Ai Weiwei dropped a hand vase, it's the idea of the breaking of a vessel, as if the vessel embodies and contains history. There'd been the Cultural Revolution, lots and lots of old things which would seem to have value were destroyed. And following it, China went through this enormous change of, industrialization.
By dropping the urn in 1995, Ai Weiwei was essentially creating a cenotaph, a tomb of a sort of unknown soldier. He was dropping one urn to draw attention to the many others that were being destroyed around him every day. You have this urn coated in this industrial paint. The forms of the original object still exist but are obscured. And this sort of gauche covering seems out of place but is the reality. And I think that's exactly how he sees the state in which he lives.
The new millennium was a turning point for contemporary art in China. Shanghai held an international biennale for the first time, and alongside it were several fringe events, including a show curated by Ai Weiwei and Feng Boyi. The exhibition's Chinese title can be translated as uncooperative attitude, but the English name given was simply fuck off.
就是改革开放开始之后，就社会属于一种社会转型期间。那么这个社会转型期间呢，就带来了很大的一个变化。这种变化除了这个物质形态的，包括精神层面的，还有心理层面的。那么这种的变化呢，它会在这个过程当中会有，就是有很多问题嘛。
This man just burned his personal identity code on his back. A lot of quite extreme activities.
完了，最比较刺激的就是有一个艺术家叫朱玉，就是他的一个作品是一个行为，就是吃一个死的婴儿。其中比如说像杨志超的，就是他在肩膀上种草，所以这个不合作方式呢，针对性非常明确，包括他的作品的一些比较暴力、比较血腥、比较挑战。所以呢，当时不合作方式，那么起码奠定了一个观点吧，那就是说我跟谁我也不合作。所以，因为艺术之所以，比如说这个是一个比较特殊的这么一个门类吧，那它我觉得最主要的就是强调自由嘛。
The games are awarded to the city of Beijing.
It was ironic that an artist so closely associated with the avant-garde should find himself involved with a spectacular project at the heart of the Chinese establishment. The Bird's Nest Olympic Stadium, designed by Ai Weiwei in collaboration with Swiss architects Herzog and de Meuron, was the centerpiece of the Games. It was a culmination of another strand of Ai Weiwei's work as an architect. For although he has no formal training, he's designed many buildings.
He at a certain moment discovered architecture, and I think his connection to architecture is very fascinating, because today he is one of the leading architects in China. He's part of architecture biennales, he's part of architecture exhibitions. So the architecture and design world have very much embraced him, both in China but also wider in Asia.
Is there something different about his work which characterizes it because he doesn't have a formal architectural training?
It's simple, but it's very subtle. I think spatially it's extremely interesting, not just in the way that the internal spaces work, but also the way the outside spaces are unpredictable and have some of the tightness, the compression of parts of China, almost like some of the urban spaces in microcosm. Yes, very personal and very human. The way, for example, that he uses brick and creates extraordinary patterns. He has a very distinctive style.
But having played a crucial role in designing the Bird's Nest Stadium, Ai Weiwei distanced himself from the project, criticizing the use of the Olympics by the Chinese government as propaganda.
He uses the publicity he gets in a very knowing way, and he uses exhibitions and projects like the Bird's Nest Stadium as a platform to be visible and to be able, if you like, to turn them against themselves. And that's extremely interesting and a very sophisticated way of being an artist.
He has loyalty, ultimately, only to himself. I mean, to his project. And that's not a criticism. What I'm saying is that he operates without fear or favor, and he is basically interested in producing art. He's made money. He's lost money. He basically takes his own money and pours it back into his studio. I don't think he's an especially good businessman. He is, in all these various ways, kind of uninterested in the broader experience of being an artist beyond what it actually means to make art.
Do you believe that art can communicate and engage with ordinary people as well as using ordinary people's experience? Are you a believer in connecting with lots of people?
Yes, I think the only one art has the connecting to our ordinary feelings or ordinary common sense, it becomes most powerful.
South of Beijing is Jindajian, the home of Chinese porcelain and the center of ceramic production for over 1,000 years. Many of the inhabitants work in the industry, in a city where even the street lights are made from ceramic.
Jingdezhen was the imperial kiln town for some 500 years and was drastically impacted in the early 1990s when the state-owned porcelain workshops shut down, and suddenly you had thousands of craftsmen who had to fend for themselves with nothing to their names. The only reason great craftsmanship has been preserved as well as it has is that there is a thriving market for fake reproductions of famous vessels from, say, the Ming and Qing. That actually this tendency in contemporary China to counterfeit things and pass them off as real has functioned to preserve an otherwise doomed set of workman skills.
Ai Weiwei is visiting his old friend Mr. Liu, who owns this ceramic workshop. Many of Ai Weiwei's porcelain artworks are made here from the finest Jindajian clay.
像这个里面就是这样的，是吧？对。新玩意儿却不是这个颜色，是发灰。
深绿。
发灰。灰绿，灰绿色。
灰绿。
但这个倒不重要，一个颜色比较好一点。
应该是就说咱们的小边的，
我觉得这画的特别好。
用的这个就是这个景德镇的高白泥。现在这个泥呢。
手那能扎下来，中在上。They use this stone to make the body of porcelain, also the glaze. So when it makes porcelain, it comes out a very special color and a special density in there. This is the best quality. If you're talking about the Chinese porcelain, this is the highest quality you can get. After you get the rocks, you deliver to here, to put in this water mill and to really crush the stone. It takes so long to really make it to be very fine powder. So.
For the past 2 years, Ai Weiwei has been overseeing the production of porcelain sunflower seeds. These will go towards making the final installation at Tate Modern's Turbine Hall. He's employed over 1,600 local artisans.
换换它就稠了，是吧？
在书上画。在书上画的。
书上的。真平。
对。
对吧？花了这么大力气，不知道干嘛使。是啊，
我们也有兴趣看。
To be able to bring together this community, getting a whole village, and to get this kind of spirit, I think is quite extraordinary. And you look at it, and if you put it next to a sunflower seed, it's almost impossible visually to tell it apart.
During the Cultural Revolution, and when Weiwei and his father had to go in exile, there was almost nothing to eat. Many, many, many more millions Chinese, they lived off these sunflower seeds. Now Ai Weiwei decided to create almost a monument for this part of Chinese history, which has to do with the multitude, which has to do with poverty, but which has to do also with transformation, because we can overcome.
Yeah, first you make molds, hundreds mold, because you need a variety of them. Then you compress this kind of mud, almost like liquid chocolate, into it to let it dry. Then you take it out, use hand to fix each individual. Then you put in the oven, 1,300 degrees. Then you start to paint on both sides, 4 or 5 strokes, and put in the oven again. Yes, the sunflower seeds are made by God, but this is made really by hands of the people, one by one.
Two and a half years in the making, having travelled over 5,000 miles from Jindajian to London, the seeds are finally installed at Tate Modern's Turbine Hall.
It's amazing. They're beautiful things. First of all, in terms of the porcelain, is this where the Ming vase tradition comes from as well?
Yes, yes.
And is the process
exactly
the same process?
Same, exactly same.
And why did you choose these sunflower seeds?
When we grew up in a socialist society, probably the only pleasure we could get is to have a pocket full
of these?
Yes, we always, like, if we talk, I always give you some. We start to eat the sunflower seeds. Actually, in many Chinese, their front tooth would leave a mark because eating that. You have like little cracks there because you don't have it, but a lot of people have it.
Why 100 million? Is there a reason for 100 million?
Relate to the history and to many different issues, you know, mass production.
Yes, I was just thinking about this.
Because China's
full of mass production.
Yeah.
In fact, China's history, even recent history, of course, is all about reproduction and mass production. And yet, of course, the irony here is that each of these is individually
Yes,
made.
it's not really machine-made.
at all.
Yes. Think this is number, but only 1/16 of China's population. It's kind of hard to walk. It's like really like a sand.
Yes. Well, that again, this is very much a physical experience.
Yeah. Always have to come out with your own individual interpretation.
They're all handmade, aren't they? Each one or something?
No, they're not.
In this
by loads of Chinese people. That's incredible.
Well, that makes it that much more special, I guess.
Do you think I can take one home?
The kids have just loved it here. They've sort of been playing around building almost like sandcastles.
I tried digging to the bottom of it and I couldn't.
It's almost like being at the seaside. Everybody's sitting around, burying themselves in these seeds.
Usually I'd be with my sisters and they'd probably end up burying me.
Something totally relaxing out of something which is hard, yet soft when you get to grips with it. It makes you think. It absolutely makes you think.
it's quite nostalgic, I guess, and everybody of all ages are like want to straight away pick it up, and you remember all those happy memories out playing with your friends, with your parents, or yes, yeah, it sends you back to younger times where everything was simple. You know, you can just sit there for hours on end and not worry about time or.
Ai Weiwei's sunflower seeds can be seen at Tate Modern until May 2011. For health and safety reasons, however, full access will be restricted.
And you can join Ai Weiwei online right now for a live chat where he'll be answering your questions from his home in China. Take part at the website bbc.co.uk/imagine.